The new CEO justified my siblings being paid more. Look at this table. 2 siblings who stole my inheritance and a CEO who just signed my death warrant. They didn't give me a promotion for 10 years of loyalty. They gave me a 20% pay cut and told me I was the fat being trimmed. My brother is wearing a $3,000 suit I paid for. My sister is drinking champagne bought with my overtime. They think I'm going to go back to my desk and cry. They think I'm the reliable one. They forgot one thing. I didn't just build the company's locks. I am the lock. I'm going to change the combination. By the time they finish that toast, their entire empire will be a pile of digital ash. The question is, who's going to burn first? They say the loudest person in the room is the one with the most power. But they're wrong. In the world of high-stakes business, in the concrete canyons of New York, power isn't the roar. It's the silence. It's the person who knows where every wire is buried, where every secret is kept, and exactly which brick holds up the entire foundation. My name is Ilara. And for 10 years, I was that brick. I watched the sun rise over the Manhattan skyline from the 42nd floor of Sterling & Sons more times than I watched it set from my own apartment. I knew the hum of the server room better than the sound of my own mother's voice. I was the reliable one. The smart one. The one who didn't mind staying late because family comes first. But family is a dangerous word in the hands of people who want something for nothing. It was a Tuesday. The kind of day where the sky is the color of a bruised ego. I was sitting in my office, if you could call it that. It was a glorified storage closet tucked behind the main server hub. No windows. No mahogany desk. Just 3 monitors, a stack of cooling fans, and the proprietary code I had spent a decade perfecting. My brother, Julian, burst in without knocking. He smelled like expensive cologne and arrogance. He was wearing a $3,000 suit that I'd helped him pick out with a bonus he hadn't earned. Ilara, the pitch for the Henderson merger is in 10 minutes, he snapped, checking his gold watch. Is the real-time data visualization ready? I didn't look up from my screen. My eyes were burning. I'd been awake for 36 hours straight building that visualization. It's ready, Julian. I've synced it to your tablet. But we need to talk about the back-end security. If the traffic spikes during the demo. Yeah, whatever, he interrupted, waving a hand as if my expertise was a fly he was shooing away. Just make sure it looks sexy. Marcus Thorne is going to be there. Marcus Thorne. The new CEO. A man who had built a reputation for trimming the fat. I felt a cold knot tie itself in my stomach. Before I tell you what happened in that boardroom. Before I tell you how my own blood turned into ice. Look at the subscribe button. If you've ever been the person who does 90% of the work for 10% of the credit, you're part of my family now. Subscribe. Don't let them keep you in the dark. And if you won't, if you're fine with being a shadow, go to the comments and explain why you're okay with being forgotten. I want to hear your excuses. The boardroom felt like a tomb. The air was thin, filtered through expensive ventilation. At the head of the table sat Marcus Thorne. He didn't look like a boss. He looked like an executioner. To his left was Julian, grinning. To his right was my sister, Mia, looking effortlessly chic, her fingers dancing across an iPad she barely knew how to turn on. I sat at the very end of the table. The invisible ghost. The Henderson deal is the future of this firm, Marcus began. His voice was like a razor blade wrapped in velvet. Julian, your presentation was adequate. Mia, your branding insights were flashy. He turned his gaze toward me. His eyes were gray, like the Atlantic in winter. And Ilara, he said, pausing. The technical architecture. It's solid, but we have a problem. I felt my heart thumping against my ribs. A problem, sir. Costs, Marcus said, sliding a folder across the table toward me. We are restructuring. I've looked at the payroll. Julian and Mia are the faces of Sterling & Sons. They bring in the clients. They are the prestige. You are internal support. I looked at the paper. It wasn't a raise. It wasn't a promotion. It was a 20% salary cut. I've been here 10 years, I whispered. My voice sounded small in that cavernous room. I built the core infrastructure. Without my code, the Henderson merger doesn't exist. Julian, tell him. Mia. I looked at my brother. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was busy lint rolling his sleeve. Mia just sighed. Ilara, don't be dramatic, Mia said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. We're all making sacrifices. Marcus is right. Your family. And family doesn't demand market rates when the firm is in a transition. You should be happy to help us stay on top. Happy? I asked. The word tasted like copper in my mouth. I haven't had a vacation in 3 years. I live in a studio apartment while you both have penthouses paid for by the prestige of my labor. I am the reason the servers stay up. I am the reason the clients don't leave. And you want me to take a cut so Julian can buy a second boat. Watch your tone, Marcus snapped. You are replaceable, Alara. There are 1,000 coders in this city who would kill for your seat. You stay because of your name. If you can't be a team player, if you can't be a sister, then maybe you don't belong at this table at all. I looked at Julian. He finally looked back, but there was no love in his eyes. Only a warning. Shut up and take it, his eyes said. Don't ruin this for us. In that moment, something died inside me. The girl who wanted her father's approval. The girl who wanted her siblings to love her. She withered away, and in her place, something cold and calculated took root. I understand, I said. My voice was no longer shaking. It was flat. Empty. Good, Marcus said, already turning back to his laptop. Now, get back to your office. We need the final encryption keys for the Henderson data migration by Friday. The encryption keys. They thought I was just a cog in the machine. They thought I was a tool they could sharpen and dull at their whim. But they forgot one very important detail about the architecture of this company. I didn't just build the locks. I am the lock. I walked out of that boardroom. The carpet felt like it was absorbing the sound of my footsteps, trying to erase me before I was even gone. I passed the break room where people were laughing. I passed the wall of portraits, my grandfather, my father, then a gap where Julian and Mia's photos would soon hang. There was no space for me on that wall. There never was. I went back to my windowless office. I sat down in my creaky chair. The fans hummed. The servers blinked. Green lights, blue lights, the heartbeat of a multi-million-dollar empire. Days later, I whispered to the empty room. That's all it would take. I opened my terminal. I looked at the code. Thousands of lines of beautiful, complex logic. My life's work. I had built a failsafe into the system years ago, not out of malice but out of caution, a heartbeat protocol. If I didn't manually verify my credentials every 72 hours, the entire database would begin a self-encryption cycle that no one, not even the best hackers in the world, could undo without the master key. And the master key wasn't on the server. It was on a thumb drive around my neck. Underneath my shirt. Hidden against my skin. I looked at the clock. 4:30 p.m. Julian walked past my door, laughing loudly on a phone call. Yeah, the merger is a lock. We're celebrating at Tau tonight. My treat. My treat. With my 20%. I didn't pack a box. I didn't take my favorite mug. I didn't even take my coat. I just stood up, pushed my chair in, and turned off my monitors. The room went dark. The only light left was the faint glow of the server rack through the glass. I walked to the elevator. The security guard, Joe, smiled at me. Leaving early, Alara. That's a first. I'm not leaving early, Joe, I said, stepping into the elevator. I looked him in the eye as the doors began to close. I'm right on time. As the elevator descended, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. With every floor I passed, 40, 30, 20, the invisible chains of family duty snapped. They wanted a sacrifice. They were going to get one. But it wasn't going to be my salary. It was going to be their entire world. Marcus Thorne wanted to trim the fat? Fine. I was the muscle, the bone, and the blood. Let's see how well he can run a company on just the prestige of 2 spoiled siblings and a suit that costs more than a soul. I walked out into the New York rain. I didn't open an umbrella. I let the water wash away 10 years of dirt. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and did something I should have done a long time ago. I deleted Julian's number. I deleted Mia's number. Then, I sent one final email to the entire board of directors. Subject: resignation. Body: good luck with the locks. The first thing I did when I got home wasn't cry. It wasn't scream. It was sit. I sat in my studio apartment, the one with the peeling wallpaper and the view of an alleyway, and I watched the clock on my stove. 6 p.m. In the Sterling and Sons boardroom, they were likely opening the second bottle of champagne. Julian was probably telling a joke he'd heard on a podcast. passing it off as his own. Mia was likely posting a photo of the Manhattan skyline to her Instagram with the caption, "Hard work pays off, number CEO status, number family legacy." They didn't know yet. They didn't know that the invisible foundation had walked out the door. They thought I was home, probably brooding, probably preparing the spreadsheets for tomorrow morning because that's what good Alara always did. But good Alara was dead. She drowned in the rain on 5th Avenue. 7:42 p.m. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It didn't just buzz, it danced. It was a text from Julian. "Hey Elle, the Henderson data folder is locked. I need the bypass code for the analytics dashboard. The client wants a preview tonight. Send it now." I didn't reply. I watched the screen dim until it went black. 5 minutes later, a phone call. "Julian." I let it ring. 10 minutes later, a text from Mia. "Alara, stop being a child. Julian is stressed. Just send the code so we can finish this and go to dinner. We'll talk about your salary later." Don't ruin the mood. Ruining the mood. That was always my crime. If I asked for fairness, I was ruining the family dynamic. If I asked for credit, I was being competitive. I stood up and walked to my kitchen. I took my phone, walked to the freezer, and tucked it behind a bag of frozen peas. I wanted the silence. I wanted to hear what it sounded like when their world started to creak. They think their status is armor. They think their name makes them bulletproof. But you and I know better, don't we? We know that when the power goes out, the prestige doesn't help you find the flashlight. If you've ever had a sibling or a boss treat your silence as permission to hurt you, subscribe right now. Don't hesitate. Because the people who don't subscribe are usually the ones who think they can get away with what Julian is doing. And if that's you, if you're a Julian, leave a comment. Tell us why you think you're entitled to someone else's soul. I couldn't sleep. I sat at my personal laptop, a machine 10 times faster than the junk they gave me at the office. I didn't log into the company servers. I didn't need to. I had a shadow portal I'd built years ago. It was a read-only view of the server health. I watched the graphs. The Henderson folder wasn't just locked. It was beginning to migrate. See, Marcus Thorne had hired a new cloud consultant last week. A guy named Derek who wore t-shirts with tech puns and thought he was a genius because he knew how to use AWS. Marcus had told Derek to optimize my architecture to save on server costs. What Derek didn't know was that my architecture was held together by a series of delicate, proprietary scripts. It was like a Jenga tower. I knew which blocks to pull. Derek, in his infinite arrogance, had pulled the middle one. On my screen, a red line began to climb. The CPU usage was spiking. The system was looking for a heartbeat command, a signal from my specific workstation to prove that the person running the migration wasn't a malicious actor. Without that heartbeat, the system assumes it's under a ransomware attack. It begins to encrypt everything. The client files, the payroll, the prestige branding. I watched the red line hit 90%. My heart should have been racing with fear, but instead, I felt a warmth I hadn't felt in years. It was the warmth of justice. 6 a.m. I woke up to the sound of my landline ringing. I'd forgotten I even had a landline. It was a relic of the apartment's previous owner. The only people who had the number were my parents. I picked up the receiver. "Alara?" "Thank God," my mother's voice crackled. She sounded panicked. "Julian is at the office. He says something is wrong with the computers. He says you're not answering your phone. He's very upset, honey. He says the Henderson deal might fall through." "Good morning, Mom," I said. My voice was as smooth as glass. "Alara, did you hear me? Your brother is in trouble. He said you walked out? After everything we've done for you? After we gave you a job in the family business?" "Gave me a job." I felt a spark of white-hot rage, but I kept it under the surface. "Mom, I've worked 80 hours a week for a decade. I've saved that company from bankruptcy 3 times. I wasn't given a job. I was given a prison sentence with a family discount. How can you be so selfish?" She gasped. "Marcus Thorne called us. He said if you don't get down there and fix this, he's going to sue you for sabotage." "Alara, think of our reputation." "My reputation is the only one that's clean, Mom. Because I'm the only one who actually did the work. Tell Julian to ask his cloud consultant for help. Or better yet, tell him to use his prestige to fix the code. Since he's the face of the company, Surely he knows how it works. I hung up. I walked to the window. The rain had stopped. The city was waking up. Somewhere across town, in a glass tower, the alarms were finally starting to go off. And this was only the beginning. Because they didn't just lose their data. They were about to lose their masks. 9 a.m. There was a pounding on my apartment door. It wasn't a knock. It was a demand. I opened it. Julian stood there. His tie was crooked. There were dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a man who had spent the night staring into an abyss. "You," he spat, pushing his way past me. "What did you do?" "The entire Henderson directory is encrypted. The backup servers are unresponsive. Marcus is losing his mind. The clients are calling every 10 minutes. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "I didn't do anything, Julian. I resigned. Remember? The email?" "You can't resign," he screamed. "You have a contract. A contract you and Marcus violated when you cut my pay without cause," I countered. "A contract that ended the moment you told me I was replaceable." He stepped toward me, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "It didn't work. Not anymore. Fix it. Right now. I don't care what it takes. I'll give you the 20% back. Just make the files come back." I looked at him. My own brother. I realized he didn't even know what he was asking. He thought it was a switch I could just flip. He didn't understand that the heartbeat was gone. The system had moved into phase 2. "It's not 20% anymore, Julian," I said softly. "Fine. 30. Whatever. Just get your laptop and—" "No. No?" Julian's voice went high, cracking with desperation. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean that I'm going to have breakfast. And then I'm going to go for a walk. And while I do that, I want you to go back to Marcus. Tell him that the help is officially on strike. And tell him that every hour that passes, the price of the key doubles." Julian looked at me like he'd never seen me before. And he hadn't. He'd only ever seen the version of me he could use. "You're a monster," he whispered. I smiled. It was the most honest thing I'd done in years. "No, Julian. I'm just family." After Julian left my apartment, the silence that rushed back in was different. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of a crime scene. I sat at my small kitchen table, staring at a manila folder I'd taken from the office 3 months ago. I hadn't opened it then. I hadn't wanted to know. I told myself that maybe I was wrong. Maybe my siblings were just lazy, not malicious. But when someone shows you who they are, you have to believe them. And when they show you through a legal document, that's not a mistake. That's a declaration of war. I opened the folder. It contained the internal audit of the Sterling Heritage Fund, a trust set up by my late grandfather for the 3 of us. It was meant to be our safety net, a portion of the company's dividends set aside to ensure we were always taken care of. I turned to page 12. My breath hitched in my throat. There, in black and white, were the signatures, Julian's, Mia's, and a signature that looked like mine, but wasn't. It was a forgery. A clumsy one, but enough to pass a distracted notary. 18 months ago. While I was in the hospital for 3 days with a burst appendix, a surgery I went through alone because Julian had a golf tournament, and Mia couldn't handle the smell of hospitals. They had moved my shares. They hadn't just taken a bonus. They had legally stripped me of my ownership in the company my grandfather built. They had turned me from an owner into an employee. An employee they could then restructure right out of existence. My doorbell rang again. I expected Julian. I expected more shouting. Instead, it was Mia. She wasn't disheveled like Julian. She looked perfect. She was wearing a trench coat that cost more than my car, and she held a bag from a bakery we used to go to as kids. "Elara," she said, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "Can I come in? We need to talk." Sister to sister. I didn't move. I looked at the bag of pastries. "Is that the bribe, Mia? Or is there a forged document in there for me to sign too?" Her face didn't even flicker. She just pushed past me, walking into my tiny apartment as if she were inspecting a slum. She set the bag on the table, right next to the manila folder. She saw the papers. She saw the forgery. She didn't apologize. She didn't cry. She just sighed and sat down. "We did that for the good of the firm, Elara," she said, pulling a croissant from the bag. "You've always been unstable. too emotional about the tech. We needed the voting blocks to be consolidated so Marcus could take over and actually make us some real money. You would have just blocked the merger out of some ethical concern about data privacy. You stole my birthright, I whispered. You forged my name while I was under anesthesia. I saved you from yourself, Mia countered, her eyes turning cold. And now, you're trying to burn down the house we're all living in. Julian says the servers are crashing. He says you're holding the keys for ransom. That's a felony, Alara. Marcus is already talking to the DA. I walked over to the table. I picked up the croissant she'd set down and dropped it back into the bag. You want to talk about felonies, Mia? Let's talk about identity theft. Let's talk about grand larceny. Let's talk about what happens to the prestige of Sterling & Sons when I hand this folder to the New York Times. Mia laughed. It was a sharp, brittle sound. You won't. You're too reliable. You're the good girl. You wouldn't hurt Mom and Dad like that. Their entire retirement is tied up in that stock. If the company's reputation tanks, they lose everything. Are you really going to put our parents on the street just to get back at us? I looked at my sister, the woman who had used my heart as a stepping stone her entire life. And I realized she was right. I was a good girl. But she forgot one thing. Good girls are the most dangerous when they finally realize that being good was just another word for being used. The company isn't going to tank because of a scandal, Mia, I said, leaning in close. It's going to tank because in exactly 4 hours, the Henderson data migration will hit its final encryption cycle. And when that happens, the data doesn't just get locked. It gets deleted. Mia's hand froze halfway to her mouth. What do you mean? Deleted? I mean, I built a fail-safe. If the system detects a breach of trust, if the heartbeat stops for more than 24 hours, it assumes the firm has been compromised. It wipes the drives to protect the clients. I checked my watch. You have 3 hours and 58 minutes before the Henderson deal and Marcus Thorne's career turns into a pile of digital ash. Fix it, she screamed, standing up so fast her chair tipped over. Alara, fix it now. I can't, I lied. I could, but she didn't need to know that. The only way to stop the cycle is to input the master key from the office terminal. But Marcus revoked my access, remember? I'm replaceable. I'm sure the new guy, Derek, can handle it. Mia grabbed her purse, her composure finally shattered. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. You're going to regret this. We're family. You don't do this to family. You're right, I said as she headed for the door. You don't. But you stopped being my family the second you picked up that pen and signed my name. When the door slammed shut, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt empty. I looked at the folder on the table. The proof of their betrayal. I thought about my parents, sitting in their Florida home, thinking their children were a team. I thought about the 10 years I'd spent building something that was being torn apart by the very people it was meant to protect. I picked up the phone. I didn't call the New York Times. I didn't call the police. I called Marcus Thorne's personal line. He picked up on the first ring. Alara? If this is a joke, it's not a joke, Marcus, I said, my voice like steel. I know about the trust fund. I know about the forgeries. And I know you were the one who suggested it to them. The silence on the other end of the line was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I have a proposal for you, I continued. And you're going to want to listen very carefully. Because your entire empire is currently on a 3-hour timer. The silence on the other end of the line after I spoke to Marcus Thorne was heavy. It wasn't the silence of someone who was confused. It was the silence of a man who had just been caught with his hand on the throat of a legacy. The trust fund, Marcus finally said, his voice stripped of its usual boardroom polish. Alara, you're playing a dangerous game. That was a private family matter. Private? I whispered into the receiver. Forgery isn't a family matter, Marcus. It's a felony. And since you sanctioned it to stabilize the merger, it's a conspiracy. I stood by my window, watching a single raindrop track its way down the glass. Pause. 10 years. I had given that man my genius, my sleep, and my youth, and he had repaid me by helping my siblings pick my pockets while I was in a hospital bed. 1:15 p.m. Just as I hung up on Marcus, my phone vibrated. A FaceTime call. It was my father. My heart sank. I knew what this was. This was the nuclear option. My siblings couldn't break me, And Marcus couldn't scare me, so they had called in the only person I still felt a shred of duty toward. I swiped to answer. My father's face appeared older than I remembered, his eyes clouded with a mix of confusion and disappointment. He was sitting in his sunroom in Florida, the bright light mocking the darkness in my apartment. "Elora," he said, his voice shaky. "I just got off the phone with Julian. He's crying, honey. He says you're trying to destroy the company. He says you've gone rogue." "Dad, did he tell you why?" "He said you were upset about a pay cut." "Alara, we talked about this. You have to be the bigger person. Your brother and sister. They have lifestyles to maintain. They have public images. You've always been the steady one. Why are you doing this now? To your own blood." "My lifestyles." I felt the words catch in my throat. "Dad, they stole my shares. They forged my signature on the Heritage Fund while I was in surgery." "Did Julian mention that between his sobs?" My father looked away. He didn't look surprised. He looked guilty. Pause. And that was the moment the final pillar of my world collapsed. "We knew, Alara," he whispered. "We let them do it. We thought. We thought if they had more control, they'd finally step up. We knew you'd never leave us, no matter what. You're the reliable one. We didn't think you'd care about the paperwork." I looked at my father's face on the screen. The man who taught me how to code when I was 7. The man who told me I could be anything, and I realized he had raised me to be a pillar just so my siblings could be the ornaments. "I care about the paperwork, Dad," I said, my voice turning into ice. "And I care about the truth. Goodbye." I ended the call. I felt a scream building in my chest, but I didn't let it out. Instead, I walked to my bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the cracked mirror. I looked tired. I looked like I'd spent a decade fighting a war I didn't know I was in. I went back to my laptop. I saw a notification on my shadow portal. Derek, the cloud consultant, was trying to force restart the main server. He was trying to bypass my encryption by doing a hard reset of the physical hardware at the New York data center. "Oh, Derek," I whispered. "You poor, arrogant boy." He didn't realize that my heartbeat protocol wasn't just a software lock, it was a logic bomb. By trying to force the system to reboot without the handshake, he had just triggered the acceleration protocol. The 3-hour timer I'd told Mia about. It just jumped. The screen flashed red. Time remaining, 59 minutes. My phone began to explode. Not just texts, automated alerts from the Henderson Group's legal team. Their portal had just gone offline. Their sensitive merger documents were being moved into a black hole directory. In 42 floors of glass and steel, panic was setting in. I imagined Marcus Thorne pacing his office, realized his $50 million bonus was evaporating. I imagined Julian trying to explain to a room full of angry billionaires why the sexy visualization was now just a flickering screen of error codes. I sat back in my chair. For the first time in 10 years, I wasn't working. I wasn't fixing. I wasn't saving. I was just watching. It was terrifying. And it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. A text came through from an unknown number. "Alara, this is Marcus. We are in the car. We are coming to you. Don't do anything stupid. We have a check. A big one." I looked at the text. A check. They still thought this was about the 20%. They still thought they could buy their way back into my grace. They didn't understand that you can't pay back a decade of being invisible. I stood up and grabbed the thumb drive from around my neck. The master key. The only thing that could stop the wipe. I didn't put it in my computer. I walked to my small balcony. Below me, the streets of Brooklyn were humming with life, people going to work, people who didn't know that a $500 million company was currently dying in a studio apartment. I looked at the drive in my hand. Then I looked at the trash compactor chute in the hallway. "They wanted to see what the company looks like without me," I said to the wind. "I think it's time I showed them." The elevator down the hall dinged. I heard Julian's voice, loud and panicked. I heard the heavy tread of Marcus Thorne's shoes. They were here. But as I reached for the door handle, I realized something. I wasn't going to hide. I was going to let them in. I was going to let them watch the final 30 minutes of their empire. And I was going to make sure they knew exactly who held the match. The door to my apartment felt like it was going to splinter. It was the sound of desperation. It was the sound of men who were used to the world bending to their wills suddenly hitting a wall they couldn't climb. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I walked to my kitchen counter, poured a glass of water, and took a slow, deliberate sip. Every second I waited was another $1 million bleeding out of Sterling & Sons. I opened the door. Julian stumbled in first, his face flushed a deep, ugly purple. Behind him stood Marcus Thorne. Marcus wasn't shouting. He was worse. He was vibrating with a silent, murderous energy. He looked around my studio apartment with a sneer of pure disgust, as if the very air I breathed was beneath his tax bracket. "Sit down, Julian," Marcus commanded. His voice was a low growl. "She's killing the deal, Marcus," Julian yelled, pointing a trembling finger at me. "The Henderson servers are purging. My login is revoked. Alara, give me the drive. Give it to me now." I leaned against the counter, the master key dangling from my neck like a silver bullet. "You're in my home, Julian," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "The help doesn't take orders in her own living room. And Marcus, if you sneer at my furniture one more time, I'll drop this key into the garbage disposal and we can all watch the 2 p.m. news together." Marcus froze. He forced his features into a mask of professional neutrality. "Alara, let's be adults. You're hurt. You feel undervalued, I get it. I've brought a settlement agreement. Full restoration of your shares, a VP title and a $2 million loyalty bonus payable today." He slid a leather-bound folder onto my scarred wooden table. I didn't even look at it. "$2 million?" I asked. I started to laugh. It wasn't a happy sound. It was the sound of a woman who had finally seen the bottom of the well. "Marcus, you're not paying me for my loyalty. You're trying to buy my silence. Because we both know what's really in those Henderson files. And it's not just data visualization. Look at them. They think every person has a price. They think that if they slap enough zeros on a check, you'll forget the way they looked at you when you were nothing. If you've ever had someone try to buy your forgiveness instead of earning it, subscribe right now. Don't let them think money can fix a broken soul. And if you're the type of person who would take the check and stay silent, go to the comments. Tell us what your price is. I want to see how cheaply you sell your dignity." I walked over to my laptop and turned the screen around. It wasn't showing the encryption timer anymore. It was showing a series of subledgers I'd unearthed while the system was in self-audit mode. "While you were busy forging my name to the Heritage Fund," I said, looking directly at Marcus, "I was busy looking at where that money was actually going. It wasn't going to Julian's boat. And it wasn't going to Mia's closet." Julian looked confused. "What are you talking about?" Marcus said the funds were being reinvested into the tech stack. "He lied to you, Julian," I said, feeling a strange pang of pity for my brother's stupidity. "Marcus has been using Sterling & Sons as a front for a shell company based in the Caymans. He wasn't trimming the fat. He was harvesting the organs. The Henderson merger? It isn't a merger. It's a liquidation. He's selling the client data private, encrypted data to a third-party broker. That's why he needed my code. He needed my encryption to hide the theft." Julian turned to Marcus, his eyes wide. "Marcus? Is that true? That's federal prison time." Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't deny it. He just stepped closer to me, his presence filling the small room. "It's called capital optimization, Alara. And you're smart enough to know that in this world, there are no victims, only participants. You sign that paper, you take the $2 million, and you become a partner. You keep playing this righteous sister act, and you'll find out that I have friends in the DA's office who can make that logic bomb look like a premeditated cyber-terrorist attack." He leaned in so close I could smell the expensive coffee on his breath. "You think you're a hero? You're a disgruntled employee who crashed a multi-million-dollar firm out of spite. That's the story the world will hear. Unless you take the deal." I looked at the clock on my stove. 1:42 p.m., 18 minutes until the final wipe. I looked at Julian, who was currently realizing that the man he worshipped had been planning to leave him with the bill for a federal crime. Then I looked back at Marcus. "You're right about one thing, Marcus," I said, reaching for the thumb drive around my neck. "There are no victims. Only participants." I didn't hand him the drive. Instead, I plugged it into my laptop. "What are you doing?" Marcus hissed. "I'm not stopping the wipe," I said, my fingers flying across the keys. "I'm changing the destination. See, I realize that if the data is destroyed, you win. The evidence of your theft disappears, and I go to jail for the crash. But if the data is redirected to, say, the SEC and the Henderson Group's board of directors. Marcus lunged for the laptop. Julian, in a rare moment of actual backbone, stepped in his way. No, Marcus. Let her finish. The screen began to glow a bright, neon blue. The acceleration protocol was now a distribution protocol. You have 15 minutes, Marcus, I said, leaning back and crossing my arms. 15 minutes to get out of my apartment, get to your lawyer, and figure out how you're going to explain the Cayman accounts. Because the heartbeat isn't coming back. It's about to become a megaphone. Marcus Thorne looked at me, and for the first time I saw it, the cracks in the porcelain, the fear. But as he turned to leave, he whispered one last thing that made the blood in my veins turn to ice. You think you've won, Alara? Look at the subledger again. Look at the signatures on the Cayman transfers. I didn't sign them. Your father did. This is the expanded Chapter 6, Rising Tension, Small Victories, where the psychological warfare shifts and Alara discovers that the betrayal goes deeper than corporate greed. It goes into the very roots of her childhood. The air in the room felt like it had been replaced with lead. Marcus Thorne's final words didn't just hurt. They dismantled the last shred of my reality. Your father did. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I watched Marcus walk out of my apartment, his expensive leather shoes clicking on the hardwood like the ticking of a countdown. Julian stayed, standing in the middle of my kitchen, looking like a little boy who had just realized the boogeyman was real and that the boogeyman was Dad. He's lying, Julian whispered, though his voice lacked any conviction. Alara, Dad wouldn't. He's retired. He's in Florida. He just wants us to be happy. I didn't answer him. My hands were shaking as I pulled up the encrypted subledger Marcus had mentioned. My vision was blurred, but the data didn't lie. I bypassed the primary shell company and dug into the direct wire authorization logs. There it was. Digital signatures, verified by a private key that only one person possessed. A key my father had told me he'd destroyed years ago when he handed the company over to the kids. The transfers weren't just for a few $1,000s. They were millions. Every time I had stayed up until 4 a.m. fixing a server to save the family business, my father was clicking a button in his sunroom, siphoning the profits into an account I wasn't even supposed to know existed. He wasn't protecting our legacy. He was liquidating it while I guarded the door. Have you ever realized that the person you were trying to protect was the one holding the knife? Have you ever sacrificed your sleep, your health, and your happiness for someone who was secretly betting on your failure? If you've ever been the good child while your parents paved the way for the favorites, subscribe right now. Don't let them gaslight you into thinking your loyalty is a debt you owe. And if you're the one who takes and takes while others give, and stay in the comments. Explain to us how you sleep at night. I genuinely want to know. The red timer on my secondary monitor was flashing. 12 minutes until data distribution. Julian, I said, my voice sounding like it was coming from a long way off. Get out. Alara, please. If you send that data, Dad goes to prison. Is that what you want? To be the one who puts our father in a jumpsuit. I turned to him, and the look on my face must have been terrifying, because he actually took a step back. Dad put himself in that position the moment he decided I was a tool instead of a daughter. I snapped. But here's the thing about tools, Julian. Eventually, they break, and when they break, they stop being useful. I turned back to the keyboard. I had 12 minutes. I could stop the distribution. I could save the company. I could save my father. Or I could do something better. I began to type. I wasn't deleting the evidence. I was filtering it. I created a logic gate. If Marcus Thorne didn't sign a full confession and a transfer of all stolen assets back to the employee pension fund within the next 10 minutes, the data would go to the SEC. But there was a second gate. A secret one. I carved out the files related to my father. I didn't delete them, I couldn't. But I moved them into a dead-drop folder that required a physical key to open. A key that I would hold. For the first time in my life, I had the leverage. Not just over the CEO. Over the patriarch. My phone rang. It was Marcus. He was back in his car, likely speeding toward the airport or his lawyer. I see the gate, Alara, he hissed. You think you're clever. You think you can blackmail me? It's not blackmail, Marcus. It's a capital optimization of my own. You have 9 minutes to sign the digital transfer I just sent to your inbox. You return the 50 million to the pension fund, you resign effective immediately, and you take the fall for the Henderson leak. You do that, and the Cayman files stay in the dead drop. And if I don't? Then at 2 p.m., every major news outlet in the country gets a notification that Marcus Thorne is the architect of the largest corporate data heist in New York history. And I'll make sure they know you used my siblings as your fall guys. You're a cold-blooded bitch, Alara, Marcus whispered. I learned from the best, I replied. You, my brother, and my father. You all taught me that family is just a word you use when you want someone to work for free. I'm just finally charging my market rate. 1:55 p.m. The notification popped up on my screen. Document signed. Assets transferred. I watched the numbers tick up in the employee pension fund account. $50 million. Money that would save the retirements of the janitors, the clerks, and the junior coders, the people Marcus called the fat. It was a victory. A small one, in the grand scheme of things, but it was mine. I looked at Julian. He was staring at his own phone, his face pale. He resigned, Julian whispered. Marcus just posted his resignation on the company Slack. Alara. You actually did it. I didn't feel happy. I felt like I had just finished a marathon through a graveyard. Go home, Julian, I said. The servers will stay up. The Henderson deal will go through honestly, this time. But Sterling and Sons is dead. Because as of 5 minutes ago, I bought out Marcus's shares with the loyalty bonus he tried to give me. Julian's jaw dropped. You own the company. No, I said, looking at the dead drop folder containing my father's secrets. I own the truth. And tomorrow, I'm going to decide what to do with it. But as Julian left, and I sat alone in the dim light of my apartment, a new alert flashed on my screen, an alert I hadn't set. Someone was remote accessing my personal laptop. Someone who knew my private IP address. A message appeared in the center of my screen, one letter at a time. Did you really think I only had one key, Alara? Dad. The words on the screen didn't make sense. I stared at them, my vision swimming. Did you really think I only had one key, Alara? Dad. My heart wasn't just beating, it was slamming against my ribs like a trapped bird. I hadn't given my father my IP. I hadn't given him remote access to my home network. But as I watched, my cursor began to move on its own. It glided across the screen with a terrifying, calm precision, moving directly toward the dead drop folder where I had hidden the evidence of his crimes. I tried to grab my mouse, to fight for control, but the system locked me out. A kernel-level overwrite. I had built the architecture of the company, but my father had built me. He knew my coding patterns, he knew my signature logic. He had left a backdoor in my mind, and by extension, my machine. My webcam light flickered on. Green. A predatory eye watching me in my own dark apartment. Then, a window popped up, a video call. I didn't click accept, he forced it open. There he was. My father. He wasn't in his sunroom anymore. He was in a dimly lit office I didn't recognize, surrounded by screens that mirrored my own. He wasn't the frail, disappointed retiree from an hour ago. He looked sharp. He looked hungry. You were always my favorite, Alara. He said, his voice echoing through my laptop speakers. Julian is a peacock. Mia is a socialite. But you? You have my spark. You have the killer in you. The killer? Dad, you stole from your own employees. You forged my name while I was in a hospital bed. How could you? How could I not? He countered, leaning into the camera. I built Sterling and Sons from a basement in Queens. I didn't do it by being reliable. I did it by being necessary. I knew that one day, Marcus would get greedy. I knew Julian and Mia would get sloppy. I needed a ghost in the machine to keep the assets moving. And who better than the daughter everyone ignores? 1:38 p.m. I'm not just taking the Cayman files back, Alara, my father said, his fingers clicking rhythmically on his keyboard. I'm uploading a new set of logs. By the time the SEC gets the data you redirected, they won't see Marcus Thorne's name on the Cayman transfers. I felt the air leave my lungs. What are you doing? I'm putting it on Julian. No, I whispered. Julian is an idiot, but he's not a thief. He doesn't even know how to use a shell company. Exactly, my father smiled a cold, thin line. He's the perfect fall guy. The prestige brother who got too greedy. The world will believe it. Marcus will testify to it to save his own skin. And you, Elara, you'll be the hero who caught him. We'll clean the books. Julian will spend a few years in a white-collar facility, and you and I will run the firm together. Like it was always meant to be. He was offering me the throne. He was offering me the very thing I'd been denied for 10 years, but the price was my brother's life. He was asking me to trade one sibling's freedom for my own power. I won't let you, I said, reaching for the power cable of my laptop. If you pull that plug, the dead drop folder auto-deletes, and the forged logs in the main server become the only truth left, he warned. You have 2 minutes to decide, Elara. Do you want to be a VP in a world I built for you? Or do you want to be a waitress in a world where your brother is a felon and you're a nobody? 2 p.m. The clock on the wall seemed to scream. The final encryption cycle was seconds away. My father was watching me, his eyes gleaming with the pride of a man who thought he'd finally taught his student the ultimate lesson. But he forgot one thing. When he taught me to code, he taught me that every system has a primary directive, a rule that cannot be broken. And my primary directive wasn't loyalty to him. It was the integrity of the code. You're right, Dad, I said, my voice suddenly dropping to a dead clinical calm. I am just like you. I don't leave anything to chance. I didn't pull the plug. Instead, I reached for my phone, the one I'd hidden in the freezer earlier. I'd set a trigger event on it before I tucked it away. What are you doing with that? My father asked, his brow furrowing. I didn't just redirect the Henderson files to the SEC, Dad. I redirected the live feed of this call to the New York field office of the FBI. I've been recording your confession, the part where you admit to the forgeries, the shell companies, and the plan to frame Julian, for the last 8 minutes. My father's face went white. He scrambled at his keys, trying to kill the connection. It's too late, I said. I'm the reliable one, remember? I always have a backup. The screen on my laptop suddenly went black, not because he cut it but because the FBI had just seized the server he was using. I sat back in my chair. The room was dark, save for the blue light of my phone. I had saved Julian. I had stopped Marcus. I had destroyed my father. But as I looked at the door, I realized the victory felt a lot like a funeral. And then, I heard the sirens. They weren't coming for my father. They were stopping right outside my building. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Nice try, Elara. But who do you think called the FBI first? Mia. The text from Mia was a jagged piece of glass to the heart. Who do you think called the FBI first? I stood in the center of my apartment, the blue light of my screens casting long, distorted shadows against the walls. My sister. The socialite. The one I thought was too vapid to understand the back end of a spreadsheet. She hadn't been a bystander. She had been the cleaner. While Julian was the face and I was the engine, Mia was the spider. She had seen the ship sinking long before Marcus Thorne or my father ever did, and she decided that if only one Sterling was going to walk away with their reputation intact, it was going to be her. She hadn't called the FBI to report a crime. She had called them to report me. 2:05 p.m. I didn't have much time. The sirens were 2 blocks away. In New York, 2 blocks is an eternity or a heartbeat, depending on how fast you can think. I didn't run. If I ran, I was guilty. If I stayed and did nothing, I was a victim. I needed a third option. I needed a strategy that would turn their own weapons against them. I sat back down at my laptop. My fingers didn't shake. They moved with a clinical, terrifying speed. You want to play the hero, Mia? I whispered to the empty room. Then let's give the authorities a hero's welcome they'll never forget. I accessed the prestige marketing servers, Mia's private playground. I bypassed her superficial layers of security. She still used her birthday as a password, and dug into her influencer outreach logs. There it was. Mia hadn't just been branding. She had been laundering. She was paying consultancy fees to ghost accounts that redirected back into her own private offshore holdings. She wasn't just working for Dad. She was stealing from him, too. I didn't delete the logs. I did something much more elegant. I created a mirror link. I tied Mia's private laundry list to the exact same data drop I had sent to the FBI when the agents opened the files I'd sent of my father's confession. A secondary script would trigger. It would look like Mia had been the whistleblower, but a whistleblower who accidentally included her own incriminating bank statements in the evidence pile. She wanted to be the one who called the FBI? Fine. I'd make sure she was the one they had the most questions for. 2:12 p.m. The sirens stopped. The red and blue lights began to pulse against my ceiling. I had 3 minutes before they reached my door. I grabbed a second thumb drive, a decoy. I loaded it with 90% of the company's non-essential public data and a very loud, very obvious self-destruct virus. Then, I took the real drive, the one with the master keys, the Cayman signatures, and the record of the conversation I just had with my father, and I did something they would never expect. I walked to my front door, opened it, and set the real drive on the floor of the hallway, tucked under the corner of my neighbor's welcome mat. I walked back into my apartment, sat on my couch, and picked up a book. I didn't look at the screens. I didn't look at the clock. When the heavy boots hit the hallway, I felt a strange sense of peace. For 10 years, I had been running to catch up to Julian's salary, running to fix Mia's mistakes, running to earn a father's love that was never for sale. Now I was finally standing still. FBI, open up. The door didn't splinter this time. I walked over and unlocked it. 6 agents flooded in, weapons drawn, faces grim. In the back of the group, I saw her, Mia. She was wearing a perfectly tailored black suit, a single tear artistically tracked down her cheek. That's her, Mia sobbed, pointing at me. That's my sister. She's the one who encrypted the Henderson files. She's been holding us hostage for years. I tried to stop her, but she's unstable. The lead agent, a woman with eyes like flint, stepped toward me. Alara Sterling. You're under arrest for unauthorized access to a protected computer system and felony extortion. I held out my hands for the cuffs. I'm not the one you're looking for, agent. I said, looking Mia directly in the eye. But I think you'll find my sister has been very helpful. She's already provided you with the evidence, hasn't she? The agent frowned. She gave us a digital tip-off, yes. Check the tip-off again, I said, a small smile playing at the corners of my mouth. I think you'll find that in her haste to be a hero, she accidentally uploaded her own personal consultancy ledgers. You know, the ones tied to the Cayman accounts. Mia's face went from pale to ghostly. What? No. I didn't. A junior agent in the back hunched over a tablet, looked up. Ma'am? We're getting a secondary data stream from the tip-off link. It's a list of offshore wires. And the name on the account isn't Alara Sterling. The lead agent turned slowly to look at Mia. It's Mia Sterling, the junior agent finished. The silence in the room was electric. Mia's heroic tear dried instantly. Her jaw tightened. She looked at me with a hatred so pure it could have melted the handcuffs. This isn't over, Mia hissed. You're right, I whispered as the agent began to read Mia her rights instead of mine. We're only at the midpoint. But as they led Mia out, the lead agent turned back to me. Don't get comfortable, Alara. We still have questions about the Henderson servers. And your father. He's disappeared. He cleared out his Florida house 20 minutes ago. My father was gone. Mia was in cuffs. And I was standing in a room full of federal agents with the master key to a $500 million empire hidden under a neighbor's welcome mat. The strategy was working. But the game was about to get much deadlier. The apartment was empty. The FBI had taken Mia. They had taken my laptop. They had taken the decoy drive. But they hadn't taken the truth. I stood in the hallway, the cool air of the building's corridor pressing against my skin. I reached under the corner of my neighbor's welcome mat and pulled out the real thumb drive. It felt heavy. It felt like a detonator. I walked back inside, locked the deadbolt, and pulled out a burner laptop I'd kept hidden in a floorboard under my bed. I needed to see what my father had been so desperate to hide before the FBI seized his servers. I needed to know where he had gone. I plugged in the drive. I bypassed the secondary encryption. And then, I saw it. The Cayman accounts weren't the end of the trail. They were just a pit stop. The money, the $50 million from the pension fund, the millions from the consultancy fees, the stolen assets, it wasn't just sitting in a bank account. It was being used to purchase something. Shares, I whispered, my eyes scanning the ledger. He wasn't stealing the money to retire. He was stealing the money to buy back the company under a different name. But it wasn't just my father. I scrolled down to the bottom of the purchase agreement for Apex Holdings, the shell company that now technically owned 51% of Sterling & Sons. There were 2 signatures on the founding charter. One was my father's. The other made the world tilt on its axis. It was the CEO of the Henderson Group. The client. The merger wasn't a merger. It was a hostile takeover disguised as a partnership. Marcus Thorne hadn't been the mastermind. He had been a puppet. My father and the man we were supposed to be merging with had orchestrated the entire crash to devalue the Sterling & Sons stock, allowing them to buy the majority of the company for pennies on the dollar. And the reason they needed my code? It wasn't to hide the theft. It was because my code, the proprietary encryption I'd spent 10 years building, was the only thing standing in the way of the Henderson Group's ultimate goal. The back door to the New York Financial Exchange. 2:30 p.m. A soft chime came from the burner laptop. An incoming message. Not from the FBI. Not from Mia. It was a video file. No subject. I clicked play. The screen filled with the graininess of a security camera feed. It was from the Sterling & Sons office, the basement server room. My office. The timestamp was from 1 hour ago. In the video, I saw a man I didn't recognize. He was dressed in a maintenance uniform. He wasn't there to fix the cooling fans. He was installing a physical hardware bypass, a black box directly into the primary fiber line. They don't need my encryption keys anymore. I realized, the cold dread washing over me. They're going to bypass the software entirely. They're going to bleed the exchange dry from the inside. And they're going to use my name as the digital signature for every transaction. Then, the man in the video turned toward the camera. He took off his cap. It was Julian. My brother. The idiot. The one I had just saved from my father's frame job. He wasn't crying. He wasn't panicked. He looked at the camera and winked. Then, he held up a small piece of paper. On it, written in bold black ink, was a single word. Thanks. Julian hadn't been the victim. He had been the inside man. While I was distracted fighting Marcus, while I was distracted outsmarting Mia, and while I was distracted exposing Dad, Julian had been the one on the ground, doing the physical work. He had played the part of the bumbling, incompetent brother so perfectly that I, the smartest person in the room, never even looked at him. I sat in the dark, the blue light of the laptop reflecting in my eyes. My sister was in jail. My father was a fugitive. My CEO was disgraced. And my idiot brother was currently sitting on the most powerful financial weapon in the world, with my name on the trigger. The reversal was complete. I wasn't the master of the game. I was the fall girl for a plan that was bigger than the Sterling family. I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a small, old-fashioned notebook, the one I used when I first started coding, the one that didn't have a digital footprint. You want to use my name, Julian? I whispered, my voice as sharp as a razor. Then you'd better be prepared for what that name can do. I realized then that I couldn't fight them through the system. The system was theirs. I couldn't fight them through the law. The law was slow. I had to fight them through the void. I picked up the phone. I didn't call the FBI. I called the one person who hated the Henderson Group more than I did. The man who had just been fired. Marcus, I said when he answered on the first ring. I know you're at the airport. I know you have a private jet waiting. But if you want to get your $50 million back, and if you want to see the Henderson Group burn to the ground, you're going to turn that car around. Why would I help you, Alara? Marcus hissed. You destroyed me. Because, I said, looking at the video of my brother on the screen, I'm the only person who knows how to stop what's coming. And because right now, I'm the only family you've got left. Marcus was silent for a long time. Then, I heard the sound of tires screeching. I'm 10 minutes away, he said. Have the black box blueprints ready. The execution was about to begin. But this time, I wasn't playing for justice. I was playing for total, scorched earth retaliation. When Marcus Thorne walked back into my apartment, he didn't look like a CEO. He looked like a ghost. His hair was disheveled, his expensive silk tie was gone, and his eyes were hollow. He looked at my small, cramped space, the servers humming, the screens glowing, and for the first time, he didn't sneer. He looked at it like a drowning man looks at a life raft. Julian, Marcus whispered, staring at the frozen frame of my brother installing the bypass. The kid couldn't even format a PDF 3 months ago. How? He wasn't formatting PDFs, Marcus, I said, my fingers dancing across a new keyboard. He was practicing his idiot act. While you were looking for fat to trim, he was learning the anatomy of your network. He didn't need to be a genius. He just needed to be invisible. And you made sure I was the only one in this company worth watching. 2:42 p.m. The black box Julian had installed was live. I could see the data packets beginning to tunnel out of the Sterling and Sons server room. They were bypassing the New York Financial Exchange's security by piggybacking on the Henderson Group's pre-approved institutional trade line. It was a digital siphon. Every 30 seconds, micro pennies were being shaved off 10,000 different trades. It was invisible to the naked eye, but in an hour, it would be millions. In a day, it would be enough to collapse a mid-sized bank. We have to call the SEC, Marcus said, reaching for his phone. I grabbed his wrist. My grip was tighter than he expected. No. The SEC will freeze everything, including the pension fund assets I just recovered. If they freeze the servers now, the Henderson Group claims technical glitch, Julian disappears with the offshore keys, and you go to jail for the initial security breach. Marcus swallowed hard. Then what? We let them steal it, I said, a cold smile spreading across my face. We just change where the money lands. Most people think revenge is a scream, but real revenge? Real revenge is a whisper in a dark room. It's letting your enemy think they've already won while you're slowly replacing their oxygen with smoke. If you've ever waited for the perfect moment to show someone exactly who you are, subscribe right now. Don't let them think you've forgotten. And if you're the type to forgive and forget while they're still holding the knife, go to the comments. Tell us why you think your silence is a virtue instead of a cage. I opened a terminal window. This wasn't the heartbeat protocol. This was something I had written in the middle of the night 3 years ago when I first realized my siblings were stealing my lunch from the break room. I called it the mirror trap. I'm going to inject a ghost code into Julian's siphon, I explained to Marcus. He thinks he's sending the money to the Apex Holdings account in the Caymans. But my code will intercept the routing instructions at the packet level. It will create a loopback. The money will look like it left the exchange, but it will actually be stored in a temporary clearing account I've hidden inside the Henderson Group's own internal payroll system. Marcus leaned in, his eyes widening. You're going to frame the client? I'm going to make the client steal from themselves. I corrected. And the best part? The digital signature on the theft won't be mine. It won't even be Julian's. Whose will it be? I looked at Marcus. Yours. But a version of yours that was created by my father's private key. I'm going to link the theft to the very forgery Dad used to steal my trust fund. I'm going to use his own crime as the source code for the downfall of his new partners. 2:50 p.m. Injection starting in try. Dve. Enna. The screen flashed green. A waterfall of white text began to scroll. Suddenly my screen turned red. A massive warning sign popped up. Unauthorized access detected. They saw us? Marcus hissed, backing away from the desk. No, I said, my heart hammering. Not them. Him. A new window opened. It wasn't a video this time. It was a chat box. Julian. Nice try, sis. But I told you. I've been practicing. Suddenly, my mouse cursor was ripped from my control. My monitors began to flicker. Julian was counter-hacking me from inside the server room. He was using the physical black box to override my remote commands. He's locking me out of the payroll server, I shouted. If he finishes that block, the money goes to the Caymans and we're done. I looked at Marcus. I need a distraction. I need someone at the physical office. Now. The FBI is there, Alara. If I go there, I'm arrested. Not the front door, Marcus. The maintenance tunnel on 41st Street. You still have your biometric keycard for the service elevator, don't you? He thinks I'm alone in this apartment. He doesn't know you're here. Marcus Thorne looked at his hands. He looked at the checkbook in his pocket. Then he looked at the screen where his name was being systematically tied to a global financial crime. For the first time in his life, the golden boy of Wall Street had to get his hands dirty. What do I do when I get there? Marcus asked. You don't need to be a coder, I said, handing him a small, heavy magnet I'd taken off my fridge. You just need to find the server rack with the blinking blue light, the one Julian is sitting at, and you need to slap this against the side of the black box. It will disrupt the hardware handshake for 30 seconds. That's all the time I need to finish the loop back. Marcus grabbed the magnet. He looked at me, a strange sort of respect in his eyes. You're the most dangerous person I've ever met, Alara. I'm just the one who was left with nothing to lose, I replied. Marcus ran out the door. I turned back to the screen. Julian was mocking me in the chat box. Julian, 10 minutes until the final transfer, I'll give up. Dad is waiting for me in London. We can send you a postcard. I didn't reply. I just watched the GPS tracker on Marcus's phone. He was moving fast. He was crossing Fifth Avenue. But then, the tracker stopped. I zoomed in on the map. He wasn't at the office. He was stopped in front of a black SUV 2 blocks away. My phone buzzed. A picture message. It was a photo of Marcus Thorne, handcuffed, being shoved into the back of a car. And standing next to the car, holding Marcus's phone and smiling at the camera, was my father. The chat box on my screen scrolled one last message. Julian, Dad says hi. And he says thanks for the magnet. He needed a new one for his fridge in London. I stared at the photo of Marcus Thorne in cuffs. I stared at my father's face, that familiar, weathered face that used to tuck me in and tell me I was the special one. Special. I finally understood what that meant. I wasn't special because I was loved. I was special because I was the most efficient tool in his shed. And you don't love a tool. You maintain it until it's time to use it. I picked up my phone. I didn't call the police. I didn't call the FBI. I dialed the number that had just sent the photo. He picked up on the first ring. You look tired, Alara. My father's voice came through the speaker. He sounded disappointed, like I'd failed a math test instead of losing a multi-million-dollar war. You have bags under your eyes. You're neglecting your health for a game you've already lost. A game? I whispered, my hand gripping the edge of the desk so hard my knuckles turned white. You kidnapped Marcus. You framed Mia. You're destroying Julian's soul by making him a thief. Is this all just a game to you, Dad? It's an evolution, he replied calmly. I could hear the city of New York humming in the background of his call. He was close. I spent 40 years building a name. I won't let it be dragged down by Marcus Thorne's incompetence or Mia's vanity. I'm preserving the sterling legacy. And if that means pruning the branches that don't bear fruit, then so be it. I'm a branch, Dad. I'm the one who kept the lights on. I'm the one who stayed while you lived your retired fantasy. And that's why you're still alive, Alara, he said, his tone turning clinical. Julian is at the office finishing the transfer. Marcus is on his way to a private facility where he'll sign a full confession. And you? You're going to sit in that apartment, you're going to delete the mirror trap code, and you're going to accept the life I've prepared for you in Europe. Or, I can tell the agents outside your door exactly where the rest of the evidence is hidden. Put Julian on, I said. A moment of silence. Then the line clicked. Hey! Julian's voice was different. The stutter was gone. The nervous energy was replaced by a cold, flat resonance. Stop fighting it. Dad's right. We're the only ones who matter. Mia was always going to trip over her own ego. You were always going to be the martyr. I just chose to be the winner. Julian, he's going to discard you the moment the money clears, I warned. You think you're a partner? You're a placeholder. Maybe, Julian chuckled. But I'm a placeholder with $100 million and a new identity. That's better than being a reliable sister in a studio apartment with a felony warrant. Goodbye, Alara. I'm hitting enter now. 2:40 p.m. On my screen, the progress bar for the Cayman transfer hit 95%. I felt a coldness settle over me. Not the coldness of fear, but the absolute zero of a heart that had finally stopped caring about family. Dad? I said, my voice steady. Yes, Alara. You told me once that the most important part of any code is the kill switch. Do you remember? I remember, he said, sounding amused. But you can't reach the server, Alara. Julian has the physical bypass. You're locked out. I'm not talking about the server, Dad, I said, my fingers hovering over a single red key on my burner laptop. I'm talking about the Henderson Group. You see, while you were busy watching me, and I was busy watching Julian, I sent a very specific bit of pre-alpha code to the Henderson CEO's private tablet this morning. I told him it was a gift, a way to watch the theft in real time. My father's breathing hitched. What did you do? It wasn't a gift. Dad. It was a beacon. The second that transfer hits 100%, it doesn't just go to the Caymans. It triggers a massive, public sell-off of every Henderson Group share on the market. It's an automated death spiral. By the time you get your money, the company you're trying to buy will be worthless. You'll be the king of a graveyard. You'd destroy the merger? My father roared. You'd destroy the family fortune just to spite us? The fortune was never mine, Dad, I said, my finger pressing down. So I decided it shouldn't be yours, either. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the phone line on Julian's end. I heard shouting. I heard the sound of glass shattering. Julian? Julian? My father screamed. Then, a new voice came over the line. Cold, professional. This is the FBI. Secure the terminal. Nobody moves. I sat back, the phone still pressed to my ear. I heard my father's ragged breathing as he realized the beacon hadn't just alerted the Henderson CEO. It had acted as a GPS flare for the authorities. You chose the wrong daughter to underestimate, Dad, I whispered. But then I heard a sound from my own hallway. A key turning in my lock. I don't have a roommate. I don't have a boyfriend. The door creaked open. Standing there, drenched in rain, holding a silenced pistol and a look of absolute betrayal, was Mia. She wasn't in jail. She was out. And she looked like she had nothing left to lose. I stared at Mia. Her perfectly tailored suit was ruined, soaked through with New York grime. Her hair was matted to her forehead, but it was her eyes that terrified me. They weren't the eyes of the sister who used to steal my clothes. They were the eyes of a wounded animal who had realized the trap was closing. How are you here? I whispered, my hands frozen on the keyboard. The FBI. I saw them take you. A prestige consultant always has friends, Alara, Mia spat, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and exhaustion. I made one phone call to a judge who owes Dad a favor. I'm out on a technicality for 6 hours. 6 hours to clean up the mess you made. She stepped into the apartment, kicking the door shut behind her. The silenced pistol remained leveled at my chest. You think you're the hero? Mia laughed, a jagged, ugly sound. You sent those files to the SEC. You leaked my consultancy logs. You didn't just reset the company, Alara. You killed it. The sterling name is toxic. Every account I spent 5 years building is gone. My life is gone. Your life was a lie built on my work, Mia. I shouted, finally finding my voice. You didn't build those accounts. You harvested them. You stole my shares. You forged my name. And I would have shared the profits with you if you just stayed in your lane. Mia screamed back. But you had to be the smartest person in the room. You had to have the moral high ground. Well, look at your high ground now. It's a studio apartment in Brooklyn and a sister with a gun. 2:52 p.m. My phone, still on the desk, crackled with life. My father's voice was still on the line, muffled but audible. Mia? Is that you? Get the drive. Forget Julian. The FBI is at the office. Just get the master key from Alara. And get to the extraction point. Mia's eyes flickered to the thumb drive around my neck. You heard the man, Elle. Give me the key. I have a boat waiting at the pier. We can still get the assets out of the payroll server before the FBI freezes the routing. It's over, Mia, I said, slowly moving my hand toward the laptop. I've already triggered the death spiral. The Henderson stock is crashing as we speak. Even if you get the money out, it'll be worthless by the time you reach the Caymans. I don't care about the stock. Mia stepped closer, the barrel of the gun inches from my face. I care about the leverage. Give me the key. I looked at the screen. The progress bar for the death spiral had stalled at 99%. No. Julian had done it. From the server room, as he was being arrested, he must have initiated a physical hardware override. He hadn't stopped the crash, but he had paused it. The system was hung in a digital limbo. The money was trapped in the Henderson payroll server, but the sell-off hadn't gone public yet. If Mia got the key now, she could redirect the trapped millions into a private, untraceable crypto wallet before the FBI's cyber unit could map the network. The key, Alara. Now. Or I swear to God, I'll take it off your corpse. I looked at the thumb drive. Then I looked at the window. You want it? I asked. With a sudden, violent motion, I ripped the cord from my neck and flung the drive toward the open window. Mia screamed, her eyes following the silver flash as it flew through the air. For a split second, the gun wavered. I didn't wait. I tackled her. We hit the floor hard. The gun went off a dull thud as the bullet buried itself in the pile of old coding manuals on my shelf. I wasn't a fighter. I was a girl who spent her life behind a screen. But the rage of 10 years was boiling in my veins. I clawed at her, trying to reach for the gun. Mia was stronger, driven by a manic desperation. She shoved her forearm into my throat, pinning me against the base of my desk. "You little brat," she hissed, her face inches from mine. "You always thought you were better than us. But you're just as dirty now." I reached up, grabbing a heavy glass paperweight from the desk, the one Dad gave me for my 5-year anniversary at the firm. I slammed it down onto Mia's wrist. She shrieked, the gun sliding across the hardwood floor. I scrambled away, gasping for air, reaching for my laptop. I needed to finish the 1%. I needed to close the loop. But as I reached for the keys, Mia grabbed my ankle, pulling me back down. My chin hit the edge of the desk. My vision went white. Through the haze of pain, I heard the sound of her scrambling for the gun. And then, I heard a third voice in the room. "Enough." I looked up. Standing in the doorway was Joe, the security guard from the office. He wasn't in uniform. He was wearing a tactical vest. And he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Mia. "The extraction is compromised," Joe said into a radio on his shoulder. "The father is in custody. The brother is down. I have the sisters. What are the orders?" The radio crackled. A voice I didn't recognize, cold, corporate, and final, responded, "Clean the site. No witnesses to the Henderson bypass." Joe raised a much larger weapon than Mia's. I realized then that the Henderson group didn't just have lawyers. They had a cleanup crew, and we weren't part of the merger anymore. We were the fat being trimmed. Joe, the security guard, the man who had smiled at me every morning for 10 years, the man I had bought coffee for when his daughter was sick. He wasn't a guard. He was a sentinel. He stood in the doorway of my apartment, his silhouette blocking the light from the hallway. The tactical vest he wore didn't have the Sterling & Sons logo on it. It had no logo at all. Just matte black nylon and the cold gleam of a professional-grade sidearm. Mia was frozen on the floor, her hand inches from her discarded pistol. All her bravado, all her prestige arrogance, evaporated in the presence of a man who actually knew how to use a weapon. "Joe," I whispered, my voice trembling. "What are you doing?" "My father. He hired you." "Your father was a client," Alara, Joe said, his voice devoid of the friendly warmth I'd known for a decade. "But he wasn't the primary client. He was a middleman, a facilitator for the Henderson Group's entry into the exchange." Joe stepped further into the room, his eyes scanning the monitors. "He wasn't looking for money. He was looking for the trail. The Henderson Group doesn't exist to buy companies," Joe continued, his voice as clinical as a surgeon's. "It's a sovereign wealth proxy. A shell used by foreign interests to destabilize the New York market. Your father thought he was playing the game. He thought he was stealing a few million. He didn't realize he was opening the gates for an invasion." I felt the floor drop out from under me. All this time, I thought I was fighting my family's greed. I thought I was fighting Marcus Thorne's ambition. But I was actually the only person who had noticed the black box that was designed to bleed the entire American financial system dry. Imagine realizing that your family drama was just a distraction for a global heist. That while you were crying over a pay cut, you were accidentally protecting the heartbeat of your country. If you've ever felt like you were the only one seeing the truth while everyone else was blinded by their own ego, subscribe right now. Don't let them make you a footnote in their history. And for those of you who think this is too big for one person to handle, go to the comments. Tell me why you'd rather be a bystander than a barrier. 3:05 p.m. "The orders were to let you finish the bypass, Alara," Joe said, tilting his head toward the screens. "Your mirror trap was actually quite helpful. It consolidated the assets into one place. But now that the money is in the Henderson payroll server, we don't need the master of the house anymore. And we certainly don't need the Sterling sisters making noise." Mia finally spoke, her voice high and panicked. "I can help. I have the contacts. I can spin the media. Just let me go, Joe. I'll do whatever you want." Joe didn't even look at her. "You're a prestige consultant, Mia. You're built on noise. We prefer silence." He raised his weapon. Wait. I shouted, scrambling back toward my desk. The 99%. The death spiral. You can't clear the payroll server without it hitting 100%. And you can't hit 100% without my biometric override. If you kill me, the money stays in digital limbo forever. The Henderson Group will be exposed, and your sovereign clients will lose everything. Joe paused. His finger eased off the trigger just a fraction of an inch. You're bluffing. Julian said the bypass was hardware level. Julian is an idiot who thinks a magnet fixes everything. I spat. I built a secondary logic lock in the BIOS. The second my pulse sensor on this laptop stops detecting my hand, the entire payroll server initiates a zero-fill wipe. You'll have $1 billion of nothing. It was a lie. A beautiful, desperate lie. There was no pulse sensor. There was no zero-fill wipe. But Joe wasn't a coder. He was a soldier. And soldiers respect a dead man's switch. Check the laptop, Joe commanded, gesturing for me to move aside while keeping his weapon leveled at my heart. I didn't move. No. You stay there. You want the money? Then you let Mia walk out of here. And you give me a direct line to your handler. I'm not playing for my father's legacy anymore. I'm playing for a seat at the table. Mia looked at me, her eyes wide with a mix of terror and awe. She saw what I was doing. I was becoming the very thing I had hated. I was negotiating with the devil to save our lives. You'd work for them? Mia whispered. I've been working for ghosts my whole life, Mia, I said, never taking my eyes off Joe. At least these ghosts pay in survival. 3:12 p.m. The radio on Joe's shoulder crackled again. But it wasn't the cold, corporate voice this time. It was my father. Joe, do not listen to her. My father's voice sounded hollow, broadcast from the back of a federal vehicle. She's bluffing. I know my daughter. She's reliable. She's good. She doesn't have the stomach to delete $1 billion. She's trying to save her sister, kill them both and take the hardware. The air in the room turned to ice. My own father. Even from the hands of the FBI, he was still trying to manage the assets. He was willing to sign our death warrants just to ensure his partners didn't lose their investment. Joe looked at me. A slow, grim smile spread across his face. Sorry, Alara. Your old man knows you better than I do. Reliable to the end. He tightened his grip on the gun. But as he did, the screen behind me didn't turn red. It didn't flash a warning. It turned gold. A new alert popped up on every monitor in the room. A global notification. Sterling & Sons. Majority acquisition confirmed. New owner, Alara Sterling. I hadn't been bluffing about the 99%. I had just been waiting for the market to bottom out. While we were talking, I had used the recovered pension fund assets to buy every single devalued share of my own family's company. I didn't just own the company anymore. I owned the Henderson Group's front door. If you kill me now, Joe, I said, my voice as cold as the deep Atlantic, the SEC doesn't just get a data dump. They get the deed to the Henderson Group's American infrastructure. And they get it because I just willed it to them in the event of my death. The reliable daughter had finally stopped playing by the rules of the house. I had burned the house down and bought the land it sat on. Joe, the sentinel in a security guard's skin, froze. He looked at the gold screens, then at me, then at the radio on his shoulder. He was a man trained to follow the strongest signal, and the signal from my father, a man in the back of a police cruiser, was fading. The signal from the girl in the studio apartment was now a broadcast that could be heard around the world. The deed? Joe whispered, his weapon lowering an inch. You can't buy a company with stolen pension funds. The SEC will claw that back in an hour. They aren't stolen, Joe, I said, my voice as sharp as a diamond-tipped blade. I didn't take the money. I used the legal authority granted to me as the sole surviving unindicted board member to reinvest those funds into a protective acquisition. It's all in the bylaws. Bylaws my father wrote 30 years ago to protect himself from people like you. 3:20 p.m. I turned to the main monitor. I didn't look at Joe. I didn't look at Mia, who was still trembling on the floor. I looked at the digital representation of the Henderson Group, a vast, pulsing network of greed and subversion. Now, I said, my fingers hovering over the execute key. Let's talk about justice. I didn't just hit a button. I initiated a forensic backtrace. Every dollar my father had moved, every wire Mia had laundered, And every packet Julian had siphoned was now being wrapped in a digital fingerprint that led directly back to the Henderson Group's primary sovereign accounts. I wasn't just exposing my family. I was tethering them to the anchor of a global superpower's illegal interference. "You're going to destroy them," Mia whispered, her voice a mix of horror and realization. "If you link those accounts, the government won't just arrest them, they'll freeze everything. Dad, Julian, they'll never see the sun again." "They made their choice, Mia," I said. "They chose the prestige. Now they get to feel the weight of it." Strike one, the CEO. I sent a single encrypted packet to the DA's office. It wasn't a confession. It was the original, unedited audio of Marcus Thorne agreeing to the Henderson bypass. By the time he reached the private facility my father's goons were taking him to, he wouldn't be a victim. He'd be state's witness number one, with no choice but to burn the rest of the family to save his own skin. Strike two, the brother. I accessed the server room's internal intercom. "Julian," I said. My voice echoed through the office 40 floors away, where the FBI was currently breaking down the door. "The black box just logged your biometric ID as the primary source of the financial exchange breach. I've disabled your exit codes. Don't bother running. The only thing left to do is decide which one of us you're going to blame. I'd choose Dad if I were you." Strike three, the architect. I looked into the webcam, knowing my father was watching through the FBI's seized feed. "Dad," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "You told me I was the reliable one. You were right. I'm the only one in this family who actually kept their word. You said the kill switch was the most important part of the code. Well, I just pulled it. Not on the servers. On the Sterling name." Joe stepped back. He knew when a mission was lost. He wasn't going to die for a client who was currently being erased from the map. He looked at Mia, then at me, and without a word, he backed out of the apartment and disappeared into the rain-slicked hallway. Mia looked up at me from the floor. She looked small. She looked like the little girl who used to hide behind my chair when she broke Mom's vases. "What about me, Alara?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Am I strike four?" I looked at my sister. I looked at the gun she dropped. I looked at the years of resentment, the forgeries, and the lies. "No, Mia," I said, leaning back in my chair as the screens turned from gold to a steady, peaceful blue. "You're not worth a strike. You're going to do exactly what you've always done. You're going to walk out of here. You're going to find a way to spin this to your friends, and you're going to live the rest of your life knowing that the only reason you aren't in a cell is because the invisible sister decided you weren't important enough to ruin." 3:28 p.m. The Henderson Group's stock ticker on my screen hit zero. The death spiral was complete. The global heist had been turned into a global donation. The trapped billions were being automatically redirected by my code into a trust for the victims of the financial breach. I was the owner of a company that had no assets, no reputation, and no family left. But for the first time in 30 years, I was the owner of myself. I stood up and walked to the window. The FBI vans were leaving the Sterling and Sons building across town. The black box was in a bag. Julian was in cuffs. Dad was in a cell. But as I watched the rain, a new notification appeared on my phone. Not a text. Not a call. A bank alert. Deposit confirmed, $1. I frowned. $1. I opened the transaction details. The sender's name wasn't Marcus, or Julian, or Dad. It was a name I hadn't seen in 20 years. My grandfather's private lawyer. There was a note attached. "The real trust is now unlocked. Alara, you passed the test. Meet me at the library." The New York Public Library at 4 a.m. is a cathedral of silence. The marble halls, usually teeming with tourists and scholars, felt like they were holding their breath. I walked through the rose main reading room, my footsteps echoing against the high, ornate ceilings. I didn't have a gun. I didn't have a laptop. I just had the $1 notification on my phone and a sense of dread that hadn't left me since the death spiral hit zero. I found him in the back of the South Stack. Arthur Vance. He was 80 if he was a day, his skin like parchment and his eyes like flint. He was my grandfather's personal attorney, the man who had vanished from our lives the day the old man died. "You're late, Alara," he said, not looking up from a leather-bound ledger. But then again, the Sterling women always did like to make an entrance. I sat across from him. The air smelled of old paper and beeswax. "The trust," I whispered. The one my father forged my name on. That wasn't it, was it? Arthur finally looked up. A sad, knowing smile touched his lips. Your father was a greedy man, Alara. But he wasn't a visionary. Your grandfather knew exactly what kind of son he had raised. He knew that Julian and Mia would be the hunters, and your father would be the architect. But he also knew he needed a guardian. He pushed a small, ancient-looking brass key across the table. The heritage fund your siblings stole was the Bait Trust, Arthur explained. A few $1,000,000 to keep them busy, to keep their greed focused on a shiny object. The real sterling legacy isn't money, it's the data. 3:38 p.m. What data, Arthur? I asked, my fingers tracing the cold metal of the key. The proprietary algorithms your grandfather developed in the 70s. The ones that predict market shifts before they happen. He didn't use them to get rich. He used them to keep the market stable. He knew that one day, a group like the Henderson proxy would try to invade. He needed someone who didn't just understand the code, but someone who had the integrity to not use it for themselves. My father. He never had the key. He didn't even know it existed, Arthur said. He spent 30 years trying to recreate it. That's why he pushed you so hard. He was trying to force your genius to give him what his father wouldn't. He didn't realize that the key wasn't in the servers. It was in the blood. I looked at the key. This was the reason for everything. The pay cuts. The long nights. The isolation. My grandfather had designed a crucible to see if I would break or if I would become the person who could hold the world together. I destroyed them, Arthur, I said, a single tear finally escaping. Julian is in a cell. Mia is a fugitive. My father is. I don't even know where he is. I burned it all down. No, Alara, Arthur said softly, reaching across the table to pat my hand. They burned themselves down. You just refused to be the one to put out the fire. There's a difference. I thought about my studio apartment. I thought about the way Julian looked when he winked at the camera. I thought about the way Mia held that gun. They weren't my family. They were a cautionary tale. So what now? I asked. I own a hollowed-out company. I have $1 billion of dirty money I've given to charity. I'm a hero in the news and a ghost in my own life. Now, Arthur said, standing up and closing his ledger, you decide what the next 30 years look like. The Henderson Group is gone, but there will be others. The market is fragile. You have the key. You have the code. And most importantly, you have the mask. He handed me a small envelope. Inside was a new passport, a new identity, and a deed to a small, private estate in the Alps, a place with a high-speed fiber connection and a view of the world. You can be Alara Sterling, the girl who lost everything, Arthur whispered as he walked away into the shadows of the stacks. Or you can be the guardian your grandfather always knew you were. The choice, for the first time in your life, is yours. I stood alone in the library. The sun was beginning to rise, casting long, golden fingers through the windows. I looked at the brass key. Then I looked at my phone. A final message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. I'm out, Elle. And I'm coming for the key. Dad. The sun had fully risen over Manhattan, but I wasn't there to see it. I stood on the balcony of a place that didn't exist on any map. The air was thin, cold, and smelled of pine and ozone. Behind me, the steady, rhythmic blinking of 1,000 blue lights filled the room. This was the mountain, the secondary site my grandfather had built into the Swiss Alps decades ago, powered by geothermal energy and shielded by 6 feet of solid granite. I looked down at my phone. The message from my father was still there. I'm out, Elle. And I'm coming for the key. I didn't delete it. I didn't block him. I simply set the phone on the edge of the stone railing and looked out at the horizon. People ask me if it was worth it. They ask if $1 billion and a secret throne are worth the loss of a brother, a sister, and a father. They don't understand. I didn't lose them. I was never allowed to have them. You can't lose what was always an illusion. Julian was a shadow. Mia was a mask. My father was a ghost. I didn't destroy my family. I just stopped pretending they were there to catch me if I fell. We've come a long way, haven't we? From that windowless office in New York to the top of the world. You've sat with me through the betrayals, the forgeries, and the sirens. If you've learned one thing, if you've realized that your own worth isn't determined by the people who share your blood, then this story was for you. Subscribe and join the architects. Don't be the brick that gets walked on. Be the stone that holds the mountain. And for the last time, if you're still waiting for someone else to give you permission to be great, go to the comments. Tell me why you're still holding on to people who are letting go of you. I walked back into the server room. The brass key Arthur Vance had given me sat in the palm of my hand. It wasn't just a key, it was a physical hardware token. I approached the central terminal, the heart of the Sterling legacy. I didn't log in as Alaris Sterling. I didn't log in as the CEO. I typed in a single username, root. The screen didn't show my bank balance. It didn't show the Henderson Group's ruins. It showed a map of the global financial exchange, a pulsing, living web of light. I could see the cracks where the black box had tried to feed. I could see the places where the world was vulnerable. I inserted the brass key into the slot. The system hummed. Handshake confirmed. Identity verified. Welcome, Guardian. I began to type. Strike by strike, I didn't just protect the market. I reinforced it. I used my grandfather's algorithms to build a neural firewall that would detect the next Henderson Group before they even opened their first shell company. I wasn't just fixing the past. I was engineering a future where people like my father couldn't survive. A security alert popped up on the perimeter fence. A black SUV had just pulled into the private drive 3 miles down the mountain. I zoomed in on the camera. My father was in the passenger seat. He looked older. He looked desperate. He was looking up at the mountain, his eyes searching for the daughter he thought he could break. You're here for the key, Dad? I whispered to the screen. I hit a final command. Every account tied to my father's name, every hidden cent, every offshore penny instantly vanished. Not into a charity but into a dead-end encryption. The money was gone. Forever. I watched his face on the camera as he checked his phone. I watched him realize that he hadn't just lost the company. He had lost the ability to even buy a tank of gas to get back down the mountain. I walked to the main power switch for the display monitors. The invisible foundation is gone, Dad, I said, even though he couldn't hear me. I'm the roof now. And it's a long way down. I flipped the switch. The room went dark. The only thing left was the sound of my own steady breath and the distant, fading hum of a world that was finally, for the first time, in safe hands.